In this series, I've been travelling through Dark Age Europe in search of the people dismissed as barbarian. I don't believe they were. I think we owe more to the barbarians than we realise. I have now reached an important time in the Dark Ages. 200 years after the barbarians brought down the Roman Empire, powerful new forces were at work. Christianity, the pagan world, and the new world of Islam would all clash in violence. But together these worlds provided the building blocks that would lay the foundations of a modern Europe. In the year 625, a barbarian king was buried at Sutton Hoo. He was placed in a boat, surrounded by symbols of his power and wealth, a pagan proud of his European barbarian heritage. But he was the last of his kind. Christian missionaries were spreading throughout Europe. Things were about to change. In Britain, a new culture emerged, a Christian culture that was a unique mixture of the Celtic, the Anglo-Saxon, and the Mediterranean.
To understand this period where there's so little written evidence, I've come to the British Library to see a unique Anglo-Saxon book, one that shines a dazzling light on the Dark Ages.
Here, the world's literary treasures lie side by side. Each work tells us something about the people who made it, who they were and how they wanted to be seen. But for me, there is one work that stands out far above the rest. The Lindisfarne Gospels. This book not only demonstrates the extraordinary skills of Dark Age Britain, it's also the perfect example of what that melting pot of a society was able to achieve.
This is one of the earliest and most fantastic books to have been produced in Great Britain and Ireland, and even in the world. It contains the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John in Latin, which was the language that was commonly spoken throughout Europe at that time. To me, the most amazing thing about it in many ways is that it's almost entirely the work of one person, one artist scribe, and it would have taken at least 10 years to produce something of this sort.
I mean, just on a technical level, I mean, this doesn't look like paper.
No, it's vellum, which is prepared animal skin. So first catch a cow, then you have...
Just the one?
No, you've got about 150 here. If you look at the pigments, you've got a whole range of materials. The yellow is arsenic, so you had to be very, very careful when you were dealing with these materials. And the orange is a toasted lead, which often turns into a black or silver.
It's incredible, and I just can't believe how strong the purple is after this time.
Yeah, the purple's cool. That seems to be a vegetable extract, and you can get it to go from red to blue and all stages of purple in between. If you add stale urine, that gives you a nice rich red, for example. So it's an amazing act of chemistry as well, to be able to work out how to handle all of these things.
So what can we tell from just from these two pages about the book and its meaning at the time?
OK, you look at this page and you think, what has happened? A group of peoples coming together with very different cultures, pagan, Germanic, Romano-British, Celtic. The script that you see here is basically a version of Roman square capitals, the sort of things that you would have seen on Hadrian's Wall, etc., at that period. But what have they done? They've actually grafted on these very angular, strange square shapes, bar gate M's, etc., that you get in the runic alphabet, which has an almost magical context for them. And you can see that they're saying, we're the heirs of Rome. We've arrived. We've absorbed everything they had to teach us, and now we're carrying that forward in our own way. With the carpet page, this is a Coptic prayer mat. It's actually presenting your act of prayer and dedicating it to Christ, who is actually present there in the cross that is almost mystically embedded in the ornament. This speaks of Celtic textiles. The frame of it speaks of Germanic metalwork. If you look at the O, for example, you can see this whirling, swirling mass of Celtic spiral work that goes right back to the Iron Age. This isn't ignoring the Celtic tradition of Ireland. This is actually paying homage to that, to the Coptic world, to Rome, and to the Germanic peoples at the same time.
There was nothing else in Europe that came close to the achievement of this book. Like those treasures at Sutton Hoo, it represents the very best of pagan art and craftsmanship. But unlike those East Anglian riches, this work venerates a Christian god rather than a pagan king.
Can you imagine what it must have been like for somebody who spent their lifetime out on the wild moorlands of Cumbria, seeing something like this from the back of a dimly lit church as a mystical object that would act as that power line to God for them?
Only a few generations before, the Anglo-Saxons were neither Christian nor literate. Yet here they were producing a Christian book that's of world significance. Something very special was going on. In Roman times, Northumbria was an outpost at the edge of an empire. 300 years later, it was a powerful kingdom in the heart of the British Isles. It was here off the northeast coast of England, on Holy Island, that the sun would rise on a place of pilgrimage, which was to become the centre of a cultural revolution. Now, it may be remote today, but this was the crucible in which the English nation was fired. In this windswept and isolated place, cut off from the mainland twice a day by the tide, a monk called Eadfrith devoted every working day for 10 years producing the Lindisfarne Gospels.
Well, here we are on Lindisfarne, the mother church of Northumbrian Christianity. This is where it all began, on a site right by a harbour, and how many of these early monasteries were by harbours going right the way down the coast. This was their link through to the rest of the world.
These northern monasteries may seem desolate and secluded to us, but in Dark Age Europe, the sea was a busy highway, and they were perfectly placed for foreign trade and for new ideas.
Although we think of monasteries as being, essentially places where the liturgy is said, I think we just ought to remember that there's all sorts of other things happening. They are technological centres.
So it was a real hive of industry.
It's a massive hive of industry. These are the nearest thing they had really to cities. In a sense, I suppose, industrial estates, all wrapped around the centre of religious activity. It is the centre of literacy. Christianity, is the religion of a book and of many books. And now, for the first time, there is the possibility of recording history and passing on history.
The Anglo-Saxon world was cosmopolitan, adventurous, and fragmented. Christianity unified people around a common purpose, and these Gospels were the glorious product of that triumph. In 8th century Europe, this was the place to be.
It was here in the northeast of England that a kind of fused culture emerged, both artistically, spiritually, which was unique and which was also far ahead of the kinds of things that were being produced in France and Italy at the same stage. It's quite remarkable.
So it really was an intellectual centre for the whole of Europe in a way.
Intellectual and cultural, and people were aware of its existence right down to the Mediterranean lands.
Literacy, of course, completely changes society. But surprisingly, Christianity also brought something else, something essential to build a modern world: science. The old Saxon church at Escombe near Durham was built in the 7th century using stone from a nearby Roman fort. The inscriptions of the 6th Legion are still just visible today. But it also contains a curious feature. Set high up on the wall above the porch is the head of an unidentified beast. It's a sundial, the earliest English sundial in its original position. It enabled the priests to divide the day for hours of prayer. And it was science in the cause of religion which was to drive the most visionary thinker of the age. He was born here by the south bank of the River Tyne in Jarrow, today the heart of the industrial northeast. He lived and worked in a monastery from the age of 7. We know him as the Venerable Bede. Bede was an Anglo-Saxon monk and the foremost thinker of his day. He was a teacher, a philosopher, a writer, and a scientist. He lived in an industrial powerhouse of prayer and devotion. Literacy and a natural curiosity were the keys to what he would go on to achieve. Bede spent his entire life in the north of England. He didn't need to travel. Here, the knowledge of the world was imported on manuscripts.
Jarrow in the Dark Ages was a European cultural centre, at least in Bede's day. He travelled very little from the site here, but he had access to hundreds of books, and he built up in his mind a picture of every aspect of the world: history, poetry, science, astronomy.
So a lot of it was really based on an early form of interlibrary loan then?
And a good number of friends in other monasteries, pen pals if you like.
Bede wrote about the idea of an English-speaking people hundreds of years before England even existed. He was consumed by the study of astronomy and the reckoning of time, and he had a way with words.
Bede was able to explain things in a way that put concepts across very clearly to people. For instance, the shape of the earth. He says the earth is round, not round like a disc or a shield, but round like a ball, being equally round in all directions. So that's a very clear explanation. Another explanation of Bede's, which I particularly like, is about the temperature zones on the earth. The middle zone being very hot, the top and the bottom zones being very cold, and the other zones being temperate and habitable. He talks about being near a very hot fire on a very icy cold winter's evening. If you're too near the fire, it's so hot that you're not comfortable. Likewise, if you're too far out in the cold of the wintry night, you don't feel the benefit of the fire and you couldn't survive that either. But in between, you're in the temperate zone where things are just about right, and that's like where we are in the world.
Bede was a pragmatist, and his passion for scientific observation was to solve the greatest dispute of the age, the accurate dating of Easter. This involved reconciling complex calculations of the movements of the Earth, the Sun and the Moon.
Bede came up with a 532-year cycle which predicted the next date of Easter, and this work was phenomenally popular and copied right across Europe.
So you're saying his scientific curiosity was really driven by a religious motivation?
Very much so, yes.
Bede's pursuit of knowledge was always for a practical purpose. In resolving the date of Easter, he had noticed the effect of the moon on the tides. This was 1,000 years before Isaac Newton used the term gravity to explain the phenomenon. Bede was the product of a religious world driven by a thirst for knowledge, a world that exported manuscripts and imported new technology and skills. It was here that they produced the earliest coloured window glass in the whole country.
This is an Anglo-Saxon window containing Anglo-Saxon glass. The light shining through gives you a wonderful sense of colour, and it would have been probably quite unlike things that people had seen before, so I think the impact would have been very stunning. It would have been quite magical.
But just as the sea lanes brought wealth, knowledge and influence, so they also brought terror and fear. The pagan world returned with a vengeance. In 793, Lindisfarne was attacked by raiders from the north. This Lindisfarne gravestone shows the end of the world. A huge cross in the sky. On the reverse is a Viking raid. The Vikings appeared to come out of nowhere, but they had sailed across the North Sea just as the Angles and Saxons had done 300 years before. This new wave of barbarians, lured perhaps by the wealth of their distant Christian cousins, it was to be the start of a new dark age, as a flourishing culture went back into the freezer.
The monastic libraries of Western Europe were destroyed. Their books were either burned or looted for their decorated covers. The monks, the craftsmen, the artists, the writers themselves were scattered. I want to know who these Northmen were, but I don't believe they were as barbaric as we've been led to believe.
Were the Vikings merely savages who plundered, raped and slaughtered? Or were they in fact the source of many of the skills and ideas that were crucial in creating modern Europe? I've come to Scandinavia, home of the Vikings. I want to understand the people whom the Christian chroniclers tell us were barbarians. Were they simply raiders, or were they also traders?
Now, this is a model of a monk from Lindisfarne recording the raids of the Vikings, but everything else in this cabinet is either Irish or Anglo-Saxon, but we don't know whether it was traded or whether it was raided. For example, down here we have some crosses which probably belonged to the front of Bibles, and it looks to me like they've been wrenched off, so I would say this is raiding, not trading.
The extraordinary reach and influence of the Vikings was based on one thing: their domination of the seas. The Vikings had a boat for every purpose: fishing boats, trading boats, and largest of all, the Viking longship. These may only be fragments of boats, but it is still possible to detect the skills of these people and to reveal the secret at the heart of the longship.
All the Viking ships, they were very light boats, very flexible boat. This one would be very flexible, and therefore you have to know a lot about using the right materials. A boat building tradition, I mean, it's not only your own experience, it's your fathers and your grandfathers and so on. They were born with an axe in their hands.
These 21st century boat builders are rediscovering their ancestral skills.
If you're going to build a replica Viking ship, where do you actually start?
In the forest.
In the forest, yeah. Get some wood.
Yeah.
The Vikings had no saws. They split trees into planks using just an axe. They achieved strength, flexibility and lightness in their ships by shaving this timber down to a thickness of 2 centimeters, a finger's width.
So am I ruining your plank?
No, you're doing quite fine actually.
So is this the kind of axe the Vikings would have used?
This is a copy of a Viking axe. And also you can see it on the old planks from the original ship. You can see the traces from the old axes.
So you can tell what kind of axe from the different kinds of marks?
That's right, yeah.
I'm beginning to understand these northern skills. Planks fastened with iron nails. Then threads of tarred wool sealed the wood. This way, the flexible, watertight hull would gradually take shape. In Viking times, it was all planned without paper and pencil.
But how did they do this? I mean, they didn't have sort of technical drawings like...
No, they had
today.
experience and some simple rules. The master builder who is building the boat, he has already built the boat in his head, actually.
The Vikings handed down knowledge and experience from generation to generation. But without literacy, without the ability to write things down, 1,000 years of accumulated wisdom can disappear virtually overnight, leaving no trace of an immense storehouse of knowledge.
The Viking Age, they made very beautiful and good ships. It's incredible to look at the original boat and look at the materials, how good they were.
This Viking longship held another secret. Timber research showed it was not built here in Denmark at all. It is made of Irish oak, cut from trees near the Viking city of Dublin. So the evidence of this longship shows the Vikings were not just raiders, they were also settlers. And they took their considerable skills with them to the lands they settled.
Sånn kan de ha sett ut når de, før det var rustent og råttent. Mjød og ølvei, ja. Drikkehorn. Det stemmer. Det er fra kua.
But actually, the Vikings didn't exist as a people. The word Viking simply means to go raiding. Most Scandinavian people were peaceful farmers who stayed at home and raised their families and crops. We know little about early Viking society because there are few written records. Their story must be pieced together from the evidence of runestones and graves. As pagans, Vikings carried their status with them to the grave. Important people were buried in splendid burial mounds. It was here in Norway that a grave mound was opened, revealing a magnificent ship with a surprising secret. The Viking warship is one of the most potent symbols from history, and its source is this amazing vessel, the best preserved ship of its age. But history has done it something of a disservice because it never carried bloodthirsty warriors on their way to rape and pillage. It was an elegant pleasure yacht, the most sophisticated of its kind, and it was owned by a woman. The Oseberg ship was found complete with mast, rudder and full complement of 30 oars. It was a royal tomb with 2 burials inside, both of them women.
The ship was a burial for a queen, so at least we can say that you had a female on the top in that society, or she was the chieftain or the leader here. But if she was the leader on board, we can't be sure when they were sailing out at sea. So it tells us something about women in Viking Age, but not everything.
But surely it tells us that women, or at least some women, had a very powerful role.
No doubt. It shows us that she must have had a lot of power, not only the ship, but all the belongings she got with her in the grave.
A queen and her servant, perhaps, buried with a cargo of unparalleled luxury. It included a finely decorated 4-wheeled cart and 3 sleighs, carved animal heads, 3 beds, a loom and a chair.
So you think that all these things were put in there because she was going to sail to the other world, to heaven or something?
Yeah, she could also have got all these belongings with her just to show who she was, that actually she could afford to bring all her things with her to the grave, to show her rank in the society.
It seems to me there was nothing barbarian or uncivilized about craftsmen who carved so beautifully.
They are maybe the most magnificent piece of Viking Age art we have here at the museum. These wood carvings are so beautiful and they are nearly impossible to copy. You can see all the different animals figures all the way, typical Viking Age. And the amazing thing is that we don't know what it was used for. It could have been tied up on a wall, it could be a corner of a bed, post or a chair, but they have never been on the top of the prow of the ship.
For me, the carvings on the ship itself also make it a work of art.
These wood carvings, they are extremely nicely done, and nearly always it's animals like this. It's snakes, dragons, they are always fighting each other. It shows that it was more to the Vikings than rape and plunder. They made these beautiful ships.
So the Oseberg ship demonstrates that the Vikings were a wealthy and highly skilled society.
I mean, the preservation is fantastic. It's almost like it was made yesterday.
Actually, if you go like this, you can go near it. And if you want, you can smell the Viking Age, actually. You can't touch the ship, but you can come really close to history.
The sheer presence of the boats has brought me closer to the Vikings. I can see them now as people who were creative and skillful, adventurous as well as sometimes brutal. The boats have also shown me how these qualities were added to European society. The Vikings were colonizers as well as raiders. But I now know there was a third element to Viking success, and it's that legacy that I have a hunch will prove to be the most crucial. The Vikings were not just bloodthirsty warriors and hard-working settlers. They were businessmen who traded over huge distances to make their money. This was the Hong Kong of its day.
I've come to the Swedish island of Gotland to find out about a people that accumulated a huge amount of wealth based on a trading network that ran from the Baltic to the Black Sea.
The sea has always been central to the identity of the people of Northern Europe. In prehistoric times, these islanders even buried their dead in stone ships. But I want to find out more about the mysterious Viking memorials. These are not the Vikings filtered through Christian chroniclers. For the first time, I'm seeing how they saw themselves.
It's a kind of a memory stone for someone who's died abroad.
The body may be in another country somewhere.
Russia or Arabic area, whatever, yes. So we think the stones are a kind of a memory stone for someone who died somewhere else. And they used to put them up along a road where people could see them very clearly.
These are memorials to the lost traveling salesmen and long-distance raiders of the Dark Ages. They died on business trips as far away as the Black Sea. The stones were once inscribed with pictures of ships, but time and weather have taken their toll.
If you look very carefully, at least from this angle, you can see the sail here. Here you can see part of it.
And over here as well?
Yeah, exactly. Here they're coming. And this is very typical with this crisscross of lines, making a kind of picture of the sail.
So here you'd have a picture of the ship, and then you'd have the man whose memorial was being received in heaven. And at the top you'd have Odin, the king of the gods.
Very common on every stone is, of course, a ship. And I think that points to the importance of the ship for this island. And of course, the ship means to travel for the dead to the other side. And also in life, you were a merchant, traveling on the sea down to the Arabic world and so on.
So these are quite small ships, aren't they?
Exactly. We have no picture of big ships whatsoever on the picture stones. Every ship on the picture stones are somewhere between 15 and 20 people, small ships. In a way, that's rather logical. If you go up to the Russian River, you can actually transport it over land from one river to another.
So this isn't for war, this is for trade.
That the Gotlandic was very much engaged in trade.
20 years ago, this replica Viking ship was sailed and manhandled down the Russian rivers to the Black Sea. It retraced the arduous journeys made by their Viking ancestors 1,000 years before. To get from river to river, the crew had to haul it overland for hundreds of kilometers before finally reaching Istanbul. This was how the Vikings opened up a vast trading empire from the Baltic to Byzantium.
Okay, let me show you the place where we've been excavating. And I must tell you, you need a lot of imagination. You have to think about a place with about 400 or 500 people living here. Hundreds of houses, ships coming in, and a well-protected harbor. It's this tiny, tiny piece of needle. You can imagine what it's made of?
It looks like ivory.
Yeah, it is. And it's very, very smooth and extremely well preserved.
So is it walrus?
Probably, yes. We can't say, of course, it comes from Greenland, but you knew they have a lot of that material up there. So that might show a Western contact. Can you guess what this is? Have you seen it? is the egg. We used to call them resurrection egg. It has a Greek Orthodox Christian symbol from Kiev.
From Kiev in the Ukraine.
Yeah. This is cornelian bead. You can see it's lovely in the sun. This is probably coming from Arabic area or from the Black Sea area. Let's go further south to Italy. This little tiny piece is actually glass. It's called a millefiore, which means a lot of different colors of glass, and they imported it to make glass beads. Just these tiny pieces show the importance of the contact they had all the way from the Atlantic down to Arabic world with extremely long distance.
Yeah. Their trading routes explain how they became so rich.
Yeah.
These Viking traders were the commodity brokers of their day. They amassed such huge wealth that they could afford to bury it in hoards to honor their pagan gods.
Here we have it. This is just a fraction of the hoard. A fraction of 70 kilograms of pure silver.
Unbelievable, isn't it?
You can hold it. Heavy.
It's heavy, yeah.
And we call them bracelets.
Bracelets.
It looks like it was more used like a kind of a coin, if I might call it that. You might call it ring money if you want to. There was also 14,000 coins. And this is actually English coins. And we have some German coins, and we have Danish coins. And these coins are only Arabic coins, all of them. So this was coming from the Arabic Empire.
How did they get so rich?
Gotland serves, as I see, some kind of a middleman in the Baltic Sea. So it was a natural stop for people coming from west, going east.
So they were like the middleman?
Yeah, the middleman in the Baltic Sea. And you know, they're always the middleman who makes the money.
Yeah, absolutely. And what did the Gotlanders have to offer the Arabs?
Iron. Selling products of iron, and most of all, swords.
So they were arms dealers.
Exchanged, yeah.
Arms dealing and slave trading were risky businesses, but they were clearly experts. And out of their success and a pagan spirit of free enterprise grew something else, perhaps their greatest legacy: the way they governed themselves. They didn't have kings. Instead, they developed a kind of democracy where everyone had a voice expressed at a yearly assembly called the Alting.
And how did this kind of sort of democratic way of living link in with their trading networks?
It seems that almost every farmer took part in that trade, even if they were living inland, not only on the coast. And we can clearly see it's a kind of an equal society. I think you also can see it in other islands, like in Iceland. You have this Alting in Iceland, Isle of Man, not to forget. It's almost the same kind of system. And to stay stable, I think also you have to make treaties with your surrounding neighbors. I was thinking they're sitting here and planning for the next voyage to the Arabic world. If you're on a river, you are very vulnerable to attacks. You have to make treaties. That's the way to survive, to go down to the Arabic world.
It's a lot of treaties between Gotland and the Black Sea.
It seems these Vikings were skilled politicians as well as unrivaled seamen. They were also intrepid explorers, democratic settlers, and astute traders. Yet the image of their barbarity still resonates.
Do you think Vikings have been misrepresented by English?
You have to think about who wrote all the stories about the Vikings and who wrote them, the monks. And of course they were not so keen to talk well of the Vikings.
The Vikings were pragmatists. They would merge into the societies they had colonized, and eventually they would adopt Christianity. Without doubt, they had done damage. Their raids on monasteries set back a body of science and knowledge by generations. But a new kind of society would emerge in Northern Europe. It would be flexible, adaptable, and creative, able to exploit new ideas, and truly multicultural. But there was something crucial missing, something that earlier barbarians had destroyed when they overran the Roman Empire. The learning of the classical world and its tradition of the pursuit of knowledge for knowledge's sake. But astonishingly, this had been preserved, and in a most unexpected place. A place that remains the greatest secret of the Dark Ages. At the same time as the Lindisfarne Gospels were being written in Anglo-Saxon England, an Arab army crossed into Spain from North Africa. They were the Moors. The Christians of the time thought of them as Muslims and barbarians. But they would turn Spain, they called it Al-Andalus, into a land of culture, commerce and beauty. It is the greatest secret of the Dark Ages, Europe's Muslim state. So much of our knowledge can trace its roots back to southern Spain in the Dark Ages, because in this place at that time, art and science flourished. Literature, poetry and music abounded.
But most importantly of all, there was tolerance, and its capital city was Cordova.
There were mosques and public baths throughout the city. There were orchards and gardens adorned with fountains. There were books and libraries. Paper, unknown in the Christian world, was readily available.
It was a very exciting moment. There was a rich intellectual life. There was a rich scientific life, which affected mathematics, astronomy, and medicine.
The Moors valued knowledge for its own sake. They prized the ancient texts of the classical world and translated them from Greek and Latin into Arabic.
There was an important library here, and representatives in the main cities of the Islamic East who were in charge of buying the first copy of any book that appeared and sent it to the library. Oh. It was the most important library in Europe at the time, without any doubt.
Today, the magnificence that was once Cordoba can still be glimpsed in what was the Great Mosque.
This was obviously the biggest mosque.
This was the biggest mosque, yes.
But were there many others?
There probably were 15 or 20 other mosques.
And how many worshippers do you think this could have held?
At the end of the 10th century, probably 4,000 or 5,000 people together at the same time.
It's a lot.
There was no altar here. The entire prayer hall with its 800 columns was a holy place. Many of these columns are still adorned with the signatures of the proud Muslim craftsmen who made them. But this was much more than just a place of devotion. It was a meeting space and place of learning. Students would attend classes sitting beneath these columns. Just like in Christian Northumbria, religion would drive scientific inquiry. Muslims needed to establish the exact length of the lunar month and the direction of Mecca for prayers. This sophisticated sundial was made in Cordoba in the 10th century.
The instrument is signed, the work of Ahmed ibn Safar. These sundials, which have a Greek origin, have certain adaptations that correspond to religious needs, such as the appearance of this curve, which would not appear in a Greek sundial.
It is a development of a classical Greek design that has been adapted to mark the time for Muslim midday prayers.
The kind of sundials you see, for example, in Saxon churches in England, they are far more primitive.
So the Muslim science was more advanced than the Christian science?
Oh, definitely. In the second half of the 10th century, there is no doubt about it. I think scientists were interested in nature and they had the opportunity to read everything the Greek had written and to develop it.
So you're saying that the Muslims changed it on the way they added to it?
Oh, they did change it all the time. And they were adding new developments to Greek science.
The Moors perfected many scientific instruments. One of the most remarkable was the portable astrolabe, a pocket calculator of the stars. It had many uses, from simply telling the time of day to predicting the future.
You must understand that astronomers had to live on something, and one of their ways of living was casting horoscopes.
But it's very portable, isn't it? I mean, these are as portable as CDs today, really.
It can be very small, or it can be enormous. I have seen astrolabes this size. Muslim Spain was a bridge through which all Arabic science reached Europe. For example, you have the introduction of the Hindu numerals, the numerals we are using nowadays. Muslim Spain allowed Europe to recover a scientific and philosophical heritage that had been entirely lost.
Here, science and knowledge had status. Muslim scholars translated Greek, Persian and Latin into Arabic, and then built on it further to create new bodies of knowledge. Students from all over Europe travelled here to meet Muslim, Christian and Jewish scholars to learn philosophy, mathematics, science and medicine. Foreign visitors were also able to admire the Moors' practical skills. They were not only scholars and craftsmen, they were ambitious town planners too. Now the whole city goes this way except this building, and this is orientated in a completely different direction. It's orientated towards Mecca because it is a mosque, although it is 4 degrees out, which for these times was very accurate. Water was especially precious to the Moors, and they were highly skilled at irrigation. Water was elaborately channeled into their cities for fountains, bathhouses and flushing toilets. Now the Moors were a very clean people, and even their toilets tell us this, because not only did they have a sink, but they also had a flushing system. And this type of toilet is still used today in certain rural areas. Over there, there's another one. Shouldn't be looking over there. To me, the achievements of Al-Andalus are summed up in the life and work of one man. His name was Albucasis. He is known as the father of modern surgery. Albucasis wrote a medical encyclopedia in 30 volumes. His work on surgery was a breakthrough, portraying medical instruments complete with detailed explanations for their use. These are replicas of Albucasis' amazing Dark Age surgical instruments. They were used for everything from midwifery to the treatment of bones and joints. But how practical were they? I have come to a hospital in Cordoba to compare these ancient surgical instruments with their modern counterparts.
They are really amazing. Here there are instruments for operating on nasal bones, the ears, the eyes, dental surgery and skin surgery. Just like modern surgery has specialized instruments for each type of operation, these are just the same. This is a scalpel. The only difference lies in the disposable blade, which can be sterilized. The old instruments would be sterilized by cauterizing with fire. This instrument is for inserting in the veins to remove blood clots. It's a hook. Here we have a modern instrument, similar in shape. It also serves the same purpose, to grab the damaged surface of the varicose vein, making a kind of knot and then pulling.
Do you believe these instruments were actually used to perform surgical operations?
No doubt at all. They are truly amazing. In the 10th century, they were able to carry out surgery in order to relieve pain, which was formerly unthinkable. I do not think any member of the medical profession currently admits to what medicine today owes to Arab medicine. Medicine has always been founded on Greek and Roman knowledge, and Muslim medicine has been disregarded.
The glory that was Cordoba was short-lived, and Al-Andalus fell into civil war. The great libraries were destroyed.
These are just a few parts of what's left of this 1,000-year-old Muslim health spa, really, but it wasn't really that healthy for everyone, because in the next room, the last caliph was actually assassinated.
The Christians eventually reconquered Cordoba, and in a final gesture, the great mosque was converted into a Catholic cathedral. Moorish culture was destroyed, but its books and legacy would survive. Whole libraries were seized by scholars of the Christian West and eagerly translated into Latin. Eventually, they would reinvigorate European intellectual life. In this way, algebra, mathematics and medicine reached Northern Europe. Without the Moors, the forgotten people of Dark Age Europe, a precious harvest of scientific knowledge from the ancient world would have been lost. I've never really believed the myth that in the Dark Ages culture simply ground to a halt, but what I've seen here in Cordoba has amazed me. The Muslim scholars of Moorish Spain developed scientific ideas which we take for granted today. But it was also a bridge over which the best of the classical world traveled, and was later to re-emerge stronger and richer 500 years later in the Renaissance. In my journey through Dark Age Europe, I've learned things that have amazed me. I've found that in the world the barbarians built, there were examples of tolerance and experiments with democracy. They weren't barbaric, and it wasn't a time of darkness and chaos. The barbarians brought to European society something distinctive and different. They were adaptable and pragmatic, happy to take a good idea from anywhere and make it their own. They were economic migrants relentlessly on the move in search of opportunities. They were independent and individualistic, good businessmen and natural adventurers. Without the barbarians of the Dark Ages, our world would be a very different place.